Hello, I'm David, and this is Sapiens Forward with news and discussion on AI topics that matter to regular people. Today is July 3rd, 2025. And in the video today, we're going to look at some AI news stories that came across my feed recently, which are going to cover topics like education and healthcare, topics that, if you're interested in, you should really stay for the whole video and check out what's going on out there. So let's dive into what we have first up today. And we got AI agents transform higher education through practical applications. So I think this one's an interesting one. Education is a really key topic that I like to cover here. So a Stanford research study shows that 46% of workplace tasks are suitable for AI automation, with 45% of occupations preferring human AI collaboration. And universities are implementing AI agents for student services, admissions, and academic support. So at Georgia State specifically, this is a school in the United States in the state of Georgia, they're seeing a 3% increase in student persistence and 20% reduction in failing grades. So students sticking around for longer, not dropping out, staying with the program, and not getting quite as bad as grades as they used to. So I think there's several different kind of interesting components here, what's going on. So one, the Stanford study is showing that, there's something like 50%, 46 to 50% of workplace tasks are suitable for AI automation. So at the moment, this is really centered around what we would call white collar work. That's the term that's getting used quite a bit, right? Um, and half of the occupations are preferring human AI collaboration. So, what is my takeaway from this? Well, there are a lot of tasks that many of the kind of white collar, the office based professional work is very suitable for AI to be helping with. Now, if you have a job of that sort, hearing that sort of thing maybe not something that's very encouraging to you. If you are running a company that does that, that a lot of that kind of work, then that might sound like a good thing to you. Um, I think we're seeing a lot of stories more and more lately as more and more companies are trying to roll out and utilize AI tools. They're finding that the AI agents, the AI systems, the AI workflows that they're implementing aren't working out 100% every time. And so while AI may be suitable for it, they haven't quite landed on the tool or the system or the workflow that makes it work well. And as a consequence of that, or maybe a good thing, really, if you think about it, they're finding that collaboration with these types of workflows between a person and using the AI tool is producing better results. And I think that's a great thing for people everywhere who are really nervous and anxious about what is going on in the news lately with AI and all the reports about the disruption that's going to occur to the economy and to jobs. So that's good stuff. It's certainly good to hear about student performance being improved. We really have to be critical and think about like what is that really demonstrating? Is it showing that students aren't getting as bad of grades? Are they cheating more? We hope not. But I do believe very strongly that there's a lot of room for AI tools to help in education and not in just with students using them to cheat. I mean, I use AI tools to help me conduct research, to find resources, to help me kind of consolidate and summarize information that I'm trying to understand and learn about. Um, you need to be very judicious with that. You need to be careful, cautious and careful to not just blindly trust everything that these AI tools are telling you. But the idea is maybe you have a bunch of different PDFs, or maybe there is like a book provided to you or a student that is free to use. If you could get access to a digital version of that text, you can have these AI tools summarize it for you. So that can help you give a sense for what is the subject about, to help you contextualize and understand it better. I think those are positives. Those are types of things that students would try to do in the past, but maybe now they can cover more topics. They can do more things. They can work on more subjects with this kind of teaching aid. So that's interesting to see. Um, I think when it goes back to some of this work related stuff, these tags, these topics, these types of work tasks that are tagged for AI automation, I think we're really talking about kind of intellectual drudgery. These are the kinds of things that these kind of tasks and types of jobs that I think most people would agree are are not interesting to do. They just take up time. They don't require a lot of thought. And um, honestly, most people could be doing more valuable things. But ultimately, jobs exist because a company um, has something it needs done that the people who run the company or own the company can't do themselves. And so they need people to do it. And, if there's no other mechanism to do it, well, there's a job now. A person can do that. Do we want everybody to have jobs and be doing drudgery and things that are boring and not intellectually stimulating? Well, if that's all they can do, I mean, I suppose we're all, glad to have a job, but I feel in my heart that there's more interesting and more valuable and better things that people can be doing. And my hope is that if this intellectual drudgery type of jobs, these tasks can be done by AI, that'll free up people to do more interesting things. That's really the hope there that I have. And you know, if it ultimately ends up being that AI can't do a lot of these things perfectly, and people need to be supervising that, well, that may be where a lot of white collar jobs end up going to. Certainly, there's a lot of talk about half of all white collar jobs are going to be gone 2 to 3 years. They're very sensational statements. We won't really know for sure until we kind of see how things evolve, unfortunately. Um, but if that means that those people move on to doing something more interesting, that's going to be great. If it just means that they have nothing to do now, well, ultimately that's going to be terrible. So that's why we need to pay attention to these topics. We need to pay attention to what companies are doing with AI and how they're implementing them, so that we can be prepared to understand, where are we at? Where is our industry that you work in going with AI? What kinds of things can you do to advance your skills and where you focus on in your professional development to make sure that you're elevating to more interesting, more valuable tasks rather than just being replaced by AI. So there we go. That's what's going on in higher education there. Next one we got: AI pioneer predicts healthcare jobs will survive the automation wave. So Geoffrey Hinton, he's a luminary in the AI space for many, many years. He predicts that healthcare will be one of the safest sectors when it comes to AI job displacement due to unlimited demand for medical services. But he warns that only highly skilled workers will retain employment as AI takes over mundane and intellectual tasks across just pretty much every industry. So there's a couple interesting things here that I see. One is the idea that healthcare will be a safer sector from AI job displacement because of unlimited demand. And I can see where he's going with that. I mean, everybody gets sick at some point, or break a bone, or need some kind of surgery to fix something. There's all kinds of types of medical services that you're going to need throughout the course of your life, and many of those cannot be done in a kind of one-to-many fashion, like where one doctor can provide services to unlimited people. I mean, a doctor can only serve so many patients. Now, there is a concept that AI is going to help doctors serve many more patients, so that essentially being freed from some of the more mundane areas of their role in like a hospital or a doctor's office, helping them take notes, helping them with paperwork and things like that, which will ultimately free them up to see more patients. But if you think about the appointment itself, where the doctor is literally meeting with one patient, evaluating their symptoms and talking with them, that's kind of a really key limitation there for how many they can see. So I see where he's going with that. It does seem like to me that the medical space, while there's going to be disruption there, it's going to be different than maybe other industries where they'll just be straight up just replacement or roles being obsolete. I can't imagine doctors being obsolete anytime soon. Now, there are other roles in the healthcare space that aren't doctors. So clerical staff, administrative staff. We talk about the mundane intellectual tasks. This kind of goes back to the previous article we were talking about, in that, well, there could be certain types of paperwork. Drudgery is the word being used previously. That type of work could eventually more and more go the way of AI agents handling some of that work, submitting paperwork for insurance coding and stuff like that. just validating patient information, personal info, and records and things of that nature. What does that mean for people who do that kind of work rather than the actual medical work that maybe a doctor or physician's assistant might do? Well, it might free them up to be able to help a doctor's office to see many more types of amounts of patients, right? It may not necessarily mean that they don't have a job, but it could mean that they're going to be overseeing the paperwork, as it were, the digital paperwork for many, many more patients because now they're overseeing the results that AI agents are doing and ensuring that it's accurate. So there's a lot of ways that could go, but there will be disruption, and it's going to be different depending on where you are in healthcare. So definitely an area we want to pay attention to. What do we got next? Number 3, the Amazon CEO, that's Andrew Jassy, announces AI-driven workforce reduction plans. So really shaking things up at Amazon. So Andrew Jassy informed corporate employees that AI agents and generative AI will reduce workforce needs in coming years. With approximately 350,000 corporate workers at Amazon out of a total of 1.5 million total employees, Amazon expects significant changes as AI automates various business functions while also creating new types of roles. So I'm sure nobody at Amazon really wanted to be getting this kind of messaging. As of late, Amazon leadership hasn't really been too shy about shaking things up and giving bad news where it came to return to office types of mandates, and now talking about just saying, hey, you got to be expecting that we're going to be reducing employees and workforce in the years because AI is going to be doing a lot of work. So it's going to be scary. And wow, Amazon really hires and employs a lot of people. I think that when it comes to a company like Amazon, the automation and the AI impact is going to be coming from a lot of different directions into a lot of different areas. So Amazon's very dynamic. It has, more physical types of work and jobs and roles. You have the warehouses, you have packers, you have delivery drivers, that sort of thing. You have the office-based work, engineers, software developers, people who run like the online business component, that sort of thing, and distribution channel managers and all kinds of things. It's a very diverse company. So how AI and automation is going to impact a company like Amazon is also going to be very diverse depending on those different channels. But based on stories that we've been following over the last month or so, we know that Amazon is exploring robotic-based solutions for delivery systems. They've been looking at drones for delivery for a while. And now we've got AI that can do all kinds of things with software development because remember, like Amazon at its core was originally, a website. And so a significant piece of it as a business is operating through its cloud-based, its software, website, web application stuff. So, there's a lot of programming systems, which we've seen a lot of work I'm talking about here with some other articles today. There's a lot of work being done in the programming and software development space by AI. So yeah, I think it's not a really off the wall comment by Andrew Jassy to point out that there's going to be probably reductions in workforce in some areas at their company, but he says there's going to be more work in other areas. And what is it going to look like? It's hard to say, to really kind of predict that. But one of the common threads that I'm seeing that I think people should really take notice of and kind of lean into is the fact that there's going to be AI augmentation of your work. If you're working in a factory, who knows? Maybe you're going to be overseeing robots. If you are a delivery driver, you're going to be overseeing some robots that are dropping off packages from your van to the front door of a house. It's just crazy to think about, right? If you work in the corporate component of the company and kind of office-based work or software development, maybe you're overseeing AI agents that are doing analysis of supply chain stuff and distribution, or using AI agents to help with software development and code analysis for, improvements to the website and the web applications. I think there could potentially be roles that are just outright made obsolete, but given the idea that AI is not going to be perfect, just like people aren't perfect. I really doubt that any company that is significant as Amazon is just going to wholesale just remove jobs and remove people completely. But they will be looking to elevate people who have demonstrated a capacity to understand how to use AI and how it can be used to make themselves more efficient and effective. So, like I mentioned frequently, is one of those key things you need to do is you need to learn how to use AI. That's one of the key AI principles I talk about, which is become AI literate. Know what some of these AI tools can do. How can you use them? Not just in your personal life to ask questions about, give me a recipe to make, some kind of fancy spaghetti sauce on my own, or, what is this historical thing I want to learn about? Like, no, like, how can you use it in your job? What are aspects of your job that you have right now that you can use AI tools for to make you a little bit better at your job? And recognize that if you interact with other people, that is a strength that is valuable. And as more and more things get relegated to AI, those elements of your role and your job and what you do in your life where you're interacting with other people is going to eventually be like the most valuable thing you do. And that does have value. So lean into that, work on that, develop that, focus on that, because that's going to be a strength that's only going to serve you well later. All right, let's check out the next one. So the US state of Mississippi, they are partnering with NVIDIA for statewide AI education. So Mississippi, it's a state here in the US, they have an initiative, they've signed a historic memorandum of understanding with NVIDIA to help advance AI education and workforce development. So their partnership is going to cover K through 12 schools. So that's kindergarten 1 through 12 up through high school, community colleges, universities. So kind of like the full range of higher education, ultimately for providing AI training for teachers and ensuring equal access to AI education in rural and underserved areas across the state. So it's interesting. This is really seeming to be taking some lead from the US federal government, where executive orders by the current administration have really promoted the idea that there should be more integration of AI systems and tools in education, and similarly in government in general, to create efficiencies, but ultimately to ensure that in the United States, that there's a healthy level of increase of AI literacy, to augment the workforce and ensure that younger generations and current older generations know how to use AI and can make use of it in their careers and their lives. Just so I just previously talked about a few minutes ago, how understanding how AI works is important. Well, leadership across the country in the U.S. is certainly recognizing that and are apparently putting together some of these different types of initiatives, partnering with some of these AI companies to make that happen. So I think in a state like Mississippi, which arguably you could say has many different regions in the state, which can be classified as underserved, very rural. I mean, it's not a terrible thing for me to say, I think, to recognize that in many of the different standards, metrics, and that sort of thing for, let's say, education, Mississippi isn't doing as well as some of the other states in the United States. And so I think it's possible that, some of those cases, because Mississippi does have some areas which are very rural, and don't have as much investment into them. It's going to be very different from a place that's like, Connecticut or New York, right? And this is fortunately, I think it's kind of a common scenario in the southeast of the United States. But there's other areas in the country where they're very rural, and you just don't have that kind of access to a number of like very high level universities. But you don't necessarily have, in my humble opinion, quite as much of a draw for highly educated educators, teachers, administrators, people like that, to go to those communities, to those districts, to schools districts, to lend their expertise and their leadership. They just might not be as a I hate to say it, like desirable place to go. as some other communities. And it's not necessarily Mississippi, just Mississippi. There's every state in the United States has regions and areas like that. So where am I going with that? I think this is a good thing, because one of the ideas that I have mentioned previously and I've thought quite a bit about is how there are areas that are going to benefit from AI because they don't have a lot of other options otherwise. If these AI tools ultimately gravitate to the level of being what we call artificial general intelligence, and they can operate at the level of like a highly experienced, highly educated person, let's say PhD level, and and these tools can provide educational resources. Well, if you can't get a human person of that caliber to come out to your community, and to your region to staff the universities, the colleges, the schools, and provide a level of education, then you're not replacing a person necessarily, because they're not there to begin with, or they're not there in sufficient numbers to provide the level of services needed. So you're not really replacing people. You're providing an alternative to a person doing it when that person wasn't there. So I think if you look at it from that standpoint, this doesn't seem like such a bad thing. This can provide educational resources and opportunities potentially to people in certain areas that weren't going to get it otherwise. Now, is it so simple as that? No. I mean, there's a big difference, I would think, from, let's say, a very rural and underserved community in like the state of Mississippi, United States, versus a completely disconnected area at rural and, let's say, the Amazon jungle in Brazil, or somewhere very remote and a region in Africa. These are very different stories there. The United States is a very rich country, and so even though there are places in Mississippi that might be very rural and seemingly underserved, it doesn't necessarily need to be that way. It just seems like that's how it's kind of worked out. And so certainly my hope with this is that there can be a lot more resources for some of those people in those areas, like in Mississippi, and it can create opportunity and help with education there. But on the other side of the coin, I really hope we don't see this idea that, well, it's just going to replace human teachers. Now, there are other examples of schools and charter schools, and we've talked about here on the channel about how they are leading with very much AI-centric curriculum, kind of testing it out. And I think we're going to see more and more of that. Different communities are going to experiment with that idea. But ultimately, there's still people involved to help facilitate the social aspect of education. And my hope is even if there's a very AI-focused initiative going on with schooling and education in Mississippi, the human element is made a priority and kept centric to how those programs are developed. So we'll see how that goes. And the last story we got here for today. So US software developers lead the global AI coding assistant usage. So looking at some research analyzing GitHub code submissions. So GitHub is an online repository, cloud-based repository for storing code using software, right? And so these researchers looked at something like 80 million code submissions. And what their research has revealed is that US developers are essentially leading global AI coding assistant usage. And what we're talking about, coding assistants, so Copilot with GitHub, Claude Code, Codex, OpenAI. All these various AI companies have put out coding and programming assistant tools to enable software engineers to develop code more quickly or at a greater extent, and to essentially have more output. But it's also enabled people who aren't necessarily software engineers by trade to develop applications simply by the vibe coding phenomenon. So you talk to and work with your AI coding tool, and it generates the code for you. But something like 30% of the Python, so Python's a programming language and it's commonly used, it's kind of platform agnostic. It's being used quite a bit for some of the work being done with these AI tools. Something like 30% of the Python functions in the last year were AI generated. So looking at all those code submissions and where that code came from. Now, what does this mean for software development and the broader economy? Well, one suggestion here is that it can contribute a pretty massive productivity boost. So if you translate all of that programming time that would have been done by a person, but now it's being done more rapidly and more extensively, this research is predicting something like a $9 to $14 billion annual boost to productivity, essentially translating to ultimately greater economic output. So I think that's fascinating. There's been a lot of talk online and communities discussing some of the stuff about AI with disruption to software engineering, software development. Certainly, a lot of companies are laying off software developers. It's really sad to see, and Microsoft just lately laying off more workers himself. Leadership at Meta, um, basically saying that so much of their software development is being done by AI now. I don't think that ultimately software engineers and software development is going to go away completely. It's still incredibly difficult to do. What I think is actually going to happen is that, at least in the near term, what's going to do, it's going to enable very skilled and experienced software developers to do more. They're going to be able to output more code, work on more projects simultaneously. They're going to be more productive. Essentially, how this research is suggesting. We talk about productivity. It's like how many hours, units of work is an individual putting out, and it's going to lead to these experienced software engineers doing more than they did previously, because maybe some of the more mundane aspects of their software development job are now being handled by these AI tools for them. But a key thing here is that these software engineers, they're experienced enough and they have enough expertise that they can ascertain if what is being output by these tools, these AI tools, is usable, if it's valid. They have the experience to know, like, all right, AI tool, I want to do this and fix this. And was it come up with, mom, this was good, but this over here is bad. So redo this. And that's important, because if you just have these AI tools generating this by itself, without any human oversight, I mean, clearly we've seen cases and stories where it's just a bunch of garbage being output. Is it always garbage? No. But who's going to tell if it is garbage or not? Another AI tool. And that's kind of a slippery slope there you need to be worried about. The clear the clear choice is to have an experienced software developer who knows what is garbage and what is not as garbage to validate that. So this is another example of humans shifting from doing all the direct work to overseeing AI do the work. But again, to reiterate, that human in that role, that software developer, that software engineer, is experienced enough to know what is good and what is bad. And that is kind of a trend, or maybe an underlying connecting piece to all these different ideas of, when humans are shifting to roles that oversee AI, you need to be experienced enough to know, in that role for that type of work being done, what is valid, what is invalid, what is correct, what is wrong. So you can say, yes, AI did it right, move along, great. Unfortunately, that does not mean, it doesn't lead to very good things for people who are not that experienced, right? So I think that's why we've seen reports of entry level jobs decreasing. People in specifically software development, software engineering, just leaving higher education right now. There are higher degrees of unemployment than the average for let's say the United States as an example. And so I think that is pointing out a potential trend where it's going to be a lot of trouble for people, younger people, who are trying to start their careers in kind of an entry level area. And that kind of work, which was normally relegated for entry level workers, is going to be done by AI. What do those people do instead? How do they get the experience to get to that level? That's a really interesting, but very concerning challenge that we as a society are going to have to sort through and work out. And my immediate advice to anybody who's finishing school right now: lock down an internship. Just your senior year in college, if you aren't actively seeking an internship and doing anything and everything you can to get an internship, to start getting actual practical experience, then you're not focused in the area that you should be. You need to be doing everything you can to secure an internship. And I wouldn't be surprised. This is going to be a crazy statement. I wouldn't be surprised in the near future we start seeing the reverse. It went from paid internships to internships where you're basically doing work for free to you might have to pay to get an internship. I don't know. I mean, that should be what the university education was, right? But I think most of us know that when you go to university, you don't always learn everything you need to know. You learn the rest or maybe the bulk of it in your actual job. That's going to have to change. Something's going to have to change with higher education so that people aren't leaving school needing to get a job first so they can get the experience to get the actual job they want. They're going to have practical experience before they finish school. That's just going to have to be the way it is. So yeah, going to have to keep tabs on that because it could be a sign of trends of how things are going to go. Well, thanks so much for tuning in today. This is stories for July 3rd. I hope you found this enlightening. On the channel, we talk about education, healthcare, employment, because those are the topics I really think that people like you and me, regular folks, we really care about the most when it comes to AI. So thanks for checking out the channel. If you found this type of content valuable, please give a like on the video. And, if you want to get this kind of news on a regular basis, subscribe or follow the channel. You can find me on Facebook, x.com, Blue Sky, and a website at sapiens4.com. Well, thanks so much for checking it out, and we'll see you in the next one.